Flight attendant refuses a blanket to a black girl during an asthma attack. Imagine a 12-year-old trembling in her first-class seat, gasping for breath, while the attendant's smile twists with deliberate disdain. "You're fine. Stop making a scene," she says, her words slicing through the cabin like ice. Every glance from nearby passengers presses down on her tiny frame, and the humiliation feels endless. What the attendant doesn't know, her father isn't far away. Mark Anderson, Federal Aviation Administration Regional Director, is monitoring the flight, aware his daughter is traveling alone because her mother is too sick for the journey. The moment he learns of the cruelty, he's ready to act, and nothing on this flight will remain unchecked. Before we dive into this moment that will leave you furious, heartbroken, and ultimately inspired, you need to understand exactly who was sitting in that seat and why she was traveling alone at just 12 years old, carrying the hopes of her sick mother and the pride of a family. Linda Parker often said that her daughter was born with a light in her eyes. From the moment Emily Grace entered the world, there was a spark about her, something that seemed to stretch beyond the ordinary. While other children stumbled over their first words, Emily's sentences carried clarity and curiosity. By the age of 5, she was already asking questions that made her teachers pause and smile. Why does the moon follow us when we drive? Or, if plants need sunlight, how do seeds grow underground? Her mother, Linda, saw more than intelligence in her daughter. She saw resilience. Life hadn't been easy. Linda's own health had begun to fail. Dialysis treatments had become a part of her weekly routine, leaving her drained but still fiercely protective of Emily's dreams. Her husband, Mark Anderson, had long since climbed the ranks of the aviation industry. Starting out as a mechanic, he now held one of the most influential posts in the field, regional director at the Federal Aviation Administration. His work carried weight, his schedule unforgiving, but his pride in Emily was unwavering. Together, Linda and Mark sacrificed much so Emily could attend the best schools available. They believed education was not only the ticket to success, but also a shield against the harsh judgments their daughter might face as a young black girl in America. Emily never wasted their efforts. By the time she turned 12, she had already earned recognition that many high schoolers would envy. At her school's science fair, she stunned judges with a project on renewable energy, designing a small prototype that converted wind into stored electricity for household use. That project didn't just win her the fair, it won her a national award. Newspapers in their city ran her photo under the headline, "Local Girl Shines Bright in National Science Challenge." Emily wasn't just brilliant. She was humble too. When a reporter asked her how it felt to win, she answered, "I just wanted to solve a problem. I think kids like me can make the world better if we're given the chance." Linda had tears in her eyes when she read that quote. She clipped the newspaper and kept it pressed inside the family Bible. For her, it wasn't just about the trophy or the attention. It was about her daughter finding her voice in a world that often tried to silence girls who looked like her. When the award ceremony organizers announced that the winners would be recognized at a special event in New York City, the Andersons knew Emily had to be there. Mark was already stationed in the city on official FAA duty, overseeing inspections and addressing complaints in a tense season for airlines. Linda, weakened by her treatments, couldn't travel, and so, for the first time, Emily would fly alone. The boarding pass trembled slightly in Emily's small hand as she stood in line at the airport gate. At just 12 years old, she was preparing to do something few children her age had ever attempted: travel across the country all by herself. Her brown eyes scanned the crowd of adults surrounding her, each one busy with phones, bags, or hurried conversations. She pulled her cardigan closer and adjusted the strap of her little backpack, reminding herself of what her mother had told her before they left for the airport. "You're braver than you think, Emily, and every step you take brings you closer to your father." Emily's father, Mark Anderson, was already waiting in the city she was flying to. He wasn't there on vacation or even for a regular job. Mark was the Federal Aviation Administration's regional director, sent on official duty to conduct inspections and oversee safety protocols after a string of airline complaints. His schedule was unforgiving, his presence in that city mandatory. He couldn't come home to get his daughter, and her mother couldn't make the journey. Her mother's illness made everything harder. Dialysis had become an exhausting routine, leaving her weak and often confined to bed. She had kissed Emily that morning, with lips pale from treatment, but with eyes full of pride. "I'll be waiting here when you come back," she whispered, slipping a small silver cross pendant into Emily's hand. "And your father will be waiting for you there. You're never alone, sweetheart. You carry both of us with you." It was the first time Emily had seen her mother cry in months, and it had made her own heart ache. But it also made her determined. She was nervous, yes, but she wasn't going to let fear keep her from reuniting with her father. The airline attendant at the gate smiled as she scanned Emily's boarding pass, marking the letters UMNR with a highlight, unaccompanied minor. Emily hated the sound of it. She didn't want to be labeled as fragile or helpless. She was determined to show she could handle this, that she could be strong for her parents. Walking down the jet bridge, Emily held her backpack tightly. Inside were the little things that mattered most: her journal with its green fabric cover, the necklace from her mother, a well-worn paperback book, and her inhaler. She had learned to keep that last one close. Her asthma had a way of flaring up when the air got too cold. As she stepped onto the plane, the rush of recycled air met her face, cooler than she expected. The first-class cabin gleamed with plush seats and wide windows. Her father had insisted on purchasing the ticket in this section, despite the cost. "You'll be safer, more comfortable there," he told her over the phone. "I need peace of mind knowing you'll be treated well." Emily smiled faintly at the memory of his voice. She hadn't seen him in almost 4 months, and though they spoke on the phone often, it wasn't the same as feeling his arms around her or hearing his laugh fill the house. The flight attendant at the front, a woman with neat blonde hair pinned tightly back, glanced at Emily as she boarded. Her eyes flicked down to the UMNR tag on her boarding pass, and her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Emily offered a timid, polite nod before moving past, finding her seat near the window. She settled in, her small hands smoothing the journal in her lap. Through the oval window, she watched the ground crew moving carts and luggage, the world buzzing with motion. For a moment, she felt excitement again. Maybe, just maybe, this flight would be the adventure she wanted it to be. The one where she conquered her fear and proved she could stand tall, even when alone. But underneath her brave thoughts, a nervous question lingered. What if something went wrong? What if people treated her differently because she was just a child? Emily shook the thought away. She clutched the pendant around her neck and whispered to herself the same words her mother always said before hard days: head high, heart steady. She believed it, or at least she tried to. What Emily couldn't know was that this flight would test her strength in ways she had never imagined. Not because of turbulence or the distance or being without her parents, but because some people still saw her skin before they saw her humanity. And the woman at the front of the plane, the one with the perfect uniform and the practiced smile, was about to make sure Emily never forgot it. Emily pressed her forehead lightly against the cool airplane window, watching the runway shrink as the aircraft lifted into the clouds. She took a steadying breath. The world outside looked small, like toy cars and cardboard houses, but inside the cabin, everything felt overwhelming. The seat beside her was empty. That was supposed to be a blessing. It meant more space, less awkward small talk. But as the minutes passed, the emptiness only reminded her of how alone she really was. She opened her journal and scribbled a line in careful cursive. Takeoff complete, first time flying alone. So far okay. Then she drew a small heart beside the words, the way her mother always did when leaving notes on the fridge. But soon the air grew colder. The vents above hummed with a constant flow, and Emily pulled her cardigan tighter. Her thin legs pressed together as she rubbed her arms, trying to warm herself. She noticed a neatly folded blanket tucked into the seat pocket beside her. Relief washed over her. She reached for it, her small fingers brushing the soft fabric. Just as she lifted it onto her lap, a shadow loomed over her. It was the blonde flight attendant from earlier, Karen Whitfield. Her voice was sharp enough to slice through the quiet hum of the cabin. "Put that back," Karen snapped. Emily froze. I, I thought the blankets were for passengers. Karen's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. They are, for passengers who belong here. Her eyes flicked pointedly at the UMNR tag still attached to Emily's boarding pass on the tray table. Emily blinked, confused. But my seat came with it. Karen cut her off, her voice loud enough for nearby rows to hear. Listen carefully, young lady. These are reserved for paying customers, not charity cases. The words stung, though Emily didn't fully understand why. She clutched the blanket tighter, as though it might shield her from the sharpness in Karen's tone. I'm cold, Emily whispered, barely audible. Karen leaned closer, her perfume thick in the air. Then maybe you should have stayed home where you belong. She snatched the blanket from Emily's lap in one swift motion, shaking it out theatrically before folding it back into the pocket. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the cabin. A man 2 rows up shifted uncomfortably. A woman across the aisle frowned, her lips pressing into a thin line. But no one spoke. Emily's cheeks burned hot, her eyes stinging. She stared down at her journal, willing herself not to cry. She wrote quickly, the words shaky. Tried to use blanket. She took it. Said I don't belong. Karen straightened her uniform, her tone dripping with condescension. You people are always asking for more than what you deserve. Learn your place. The words rang louder than the engine's roar. Emily's heart thudded painfully. She wanted to disappear into her seat, to shrink so small that the attendant's gaze would skip over her. But the humiliation clung like smoke. She could feel the weight of every passenger's eyes. An older woman in pearls whispered to her husband. That poor girl, the man replied, low but audible. Unbelievable. Still, no one challenged Karen. The flight attendant pivoted on her heel, striding down the aisle with crisp, deliberate steps. Emily hugged her backpack to her chest. The journal lay open on her tray, her messy handwriting a mirror of her trembling. She looked at the silver cross around her neck, the gift from her mother, and pressed it hard into her palm. Her throat tightened. She wanted to be brave like she promised her mom. She wanted to believe her father's words about being safe in first class. But right now, she felt anything but safe. She shifted closer to the window, as though the thin pane of glass could shield her from the cruelty that had just unfolded. Passengers whispered a little longer, then returned to their movies and magazines. The hum of the plane continued as though nothing had happened. But for Emily, the world had shifted. The air was colder now, the seat harder. The sky outside, once exciting, now looked endless and isolating. And though the blanket was gone, what really left her shivering was something far heavier. The reminder that to some people, she would never belong, no matter where her ticket said she did. Emily pulled her cardigan tighter, but the chill only deepened. It wasn't just cold anymore. It was seeping into her bones. Each breath she took felt sharp, like inhaling needles. She rubbed her chest lightly, willing herself to stay calm. Her inhaler was tucked in her backpack, right under the flap. She touched it through the fabric, just in case. Usually she only needed it when running outside or when the weather suddenly changed. But here, high above the clouds, the dry, cold air seemed to be closing in on her. She tried to distract herself. She opened her journal again and wrote in shaky letters, "It's really cold now, harder to breathe." Her pencil paused as her chest tightened. She coughed once, then again. Passengers nearby turned their heads. Karen's heels clicked against the aisle carpet before Emily even saw her face. The sound alone made her stomach twist. "What now?" Karen's voice carried the irritation of someone already inconvenienced. Emily hesitated, then whispered, I'm not feeling well. The air is too cold. I need—" Karen folded her arms. "Need what?" "My inhaler." "Or maybe some water, please," Emily said softly, her voice cracking. The flight attendant leaned down, her smile icy. "You children and your drama? A little cough and suddenly it's a medical emergency?" She straightened, looking around at the passengers as if inviting them to share her amusement. "She just wants attention." Emily's ears burned. Her chest rose and fell more quickly now, her breath short and shallow. She tried to speak, but the words tangled with her coughing. "Please," she whispered. Karen shook her head, clicking her tongue. "You people always exaggerate, always needing special treatment. If I ran to get water every time someone cleared their throat, this plane would never make it to New York." A man across the aisle frowned, shifting in his seat. "She looks pale," he murmured to his wife. Karen shot him a tight smile. "She'll be fine. Kids like her always bounce back." Then, lowering her voice but loud enough for Emily to hear, she added, "Besides, maybe she should learn not everything is handed out for free." The humiliation cut deeper than the cold. Emily clutched her backpack with trembling fingers, pulling out the inhaler on her own. Her hands shook so badly she almost dropped it. She pressed it to her lips, took a puff, and held her breath as instructed. Relief came slowly, but not enough. Her chest still felt tight, and the air still sliced at her lungs. She coughed again, tears stinging her eyes. Passengers began to murmur louder now. A woman leaned forward from 2 rows back. "She doesn't look okay," she whispered. Karen ignored her. "Finish up with your little gadget there, sweetheart," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "But don't expect me to coddle you. First class is for strong travelers, not fragile little girls." Emily's heart pounded. She wanted to scream, to demand fairness. But the words wouldn't come. She couldn't get enough air to form them. She turned her face to the window, hot tears slipping down her cold cheeks. She thought of her mother's voice. "Be brave, Emily, even when people are unkind." But bravery felt impossible when every breath hurt. Her journal still lay open on the tray. She reached for her pencil with weak fingers and wrote, letters uneven. "Can't breathe right. She doesn't care." Her head rested against the seat. She tried to focus on the rhythm of the engines, the steadiness of the sky outside. But all she could hear was Karen's voice echoing in her mind, sharper than the whine of the turbines. "Learn your place." And as the cabin air grew even colder, Emily realized that this flight was no longer about reaching New York. It was about surviving the hours trapped between cruelty and silence, with strangers watching, but no one willing to stand up. For now. Emily gripped the armrest tightly, her small fingers trembling. Her chest was heaving now, each breath shallow and ragged. The inhaler wasn't working the way it usually did. The cold air of the cabin gnawed at her lungs no matter how hard she tried to stay calm. A wheezing sound rattled from her throat, frightening even to her own ears. The coughs came next, sharp, uncontrollable, one after the other. She bent forward, clutching her chest, her hair falling into her face as her body shook. Tears blurred her vision. She wasn't just cold anymore, she was terrified. Passengers around her shifted uncomfortably. A woman peeked over her magazine. A businessman paused mid-sentence on his laptop call, but no one moved. Except one man. He looked to be in his 50s, with gray hair and kind eyes. He wasn't dressed in anything fancy, just a plain shirt and a worn jacket. He unbuckled his seatbelt, leaned across the aisle, and spoke gently. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, his voice calm. "You okay? Do you need help?" Emily tried to answer, but only a rasp came out. She coughed again, harder this time, her whole body jolting with it. Her trembling hand reached for her inhaler on the tray, but she fumbled and nearly dropped it. The man reached halfway over the aisle. "Here, let me—" Before he could touch it, a sharp voice cut through the moment. "Sir, sit down." Karen's heels clicked as she strode down the aisle, her expression stony. She planted herself between Emily and the man, blocking his reach. "She's fine," Karen declared, her tone dripping with annoyance. "Children get dramatic when they're tired. This isn't your concern." The man frowned undeterred. "She's not fine. She's struggling to breathe. Look at her. She's wheezing." Karen didn't even glance at Emily. Instead, she narrowed her eyes at him. "Sir, I am responsible for the welfare of this cabin. Not you. Please return to your seat." Emily's coughs racked through her body again, the sound undeniable. Passengers were watching now, eyes darting between Karen's rigid frame and the small, shaking girl. The man's voice grew firmer. She needs water or help. This isn't about rules. It's about decency. Karen's lips curled into a mocking smile. Decency is making sure the rest of our paying passengers aren't disturbed by unnecessary dramatics. If she were truly in danger, I would know. Emily's tears spilled over. She pressed the inhaler to her lips, but her shaking fingers could barely manage it. Her breath came in small, pitiful gasps, and her shoulders hunched as if the air itself were pressing down on her. The man's eyes softened with pity, but Karen held up her hand sharply. Enough! You've done more than enough. Sit down, sir. For a moment, the man didn't move. He looked at Emily, then back at Karen, his jaw tightening, as if he wanted to argue further. But the weight of her authority, in the eyes of the cabin crew member standing in the galley, forced him back reluctantly into his seat. Emily caught the look he gave her as he sank down. It was apologetic, almost helpless. He had tried. But Karen had the final word. She leaned down, lowering her voice so only Emily could hear, her breath icy against the girl's ear. You don't need special treatment just because you want attention. Don't waste my time with your little act. Emily's throat tightened not just from the asthma, but from the humiliation. Her tears blurred everything. She felt smaller than ever, her dignity chipped away with every cold word. She pressed the inhaler again, desperately hoping it would work this time. Relief trickled in, slow and partial. Enough to breathe, but not enough to stop her body from shaking. The cabin returned to its uneasy quiet, but the air was heavy with tension. The passengers had seen. The man across the aisle had tried, but Karen's authority, cold, sharp, absolute, had silenced them all. Emily sank back into her seat, pressing her inhaler to her chest like a shield. Her mother's words echoed faintly in her head. Be brave, Emily. But in this moment, bravery felt impossible. And as Karen walked away, her heels striking the aisle like a metronome of power, Emily realized something chilling. She was utterly alone. The worst of Emily's coughing had eased, though her chest still burned as if each breath came through a straw. She leaned against the cool window, inhaler clutched in her hand, her small frame trembling. Her stomach growled sharp, hollow. She hadn't eaten since dawn. The dinner carts rolled down the aisle, the savory smell of pasta and garlic bread filling the cabin. Her heart lifted slightly. Maybe food would steady her, help her feel normal again. Karen appeared, professional mask fixed in place. She smiled at passengers as she laid down trays, neatly plated pasta, rolls of warm bread, a little dessert square, each tray identical. Until she stopped at Emily's row. Karen set a tray on Emily's table with a sharp snap. Emily looked down pasta, yes, but no bread roll, no dessert. Only half the offering everyone else received. She blinked, confused. Excuse me, I think you forgot. Karen leaned in close, her smile unshaken, her words a knife. No mistake, that's all you'll be getting. Emily's voice caught. But why? Karen's eyes narrowed, her tone coated with ice. Because resources aren't wasted on troublemakers. You should be grateful you're eating at all. Emily's throat tightened. She glanced around. Every passenger she could see had a full tray. Bread, dessert, juice. Only hers looked bare. Her stomach twisted with shame more than hunger. She tried to push pasta around with her fork, but every movement felt heavy under Karen's lingering glare. Across the aisle, the man who had noticed earlier frowned. He leaned forward. Excuse me, he said, voice steady. You forgot her roll and dessert. Karen turned smoothly, smiling that same brittle smile. No, sir. She refused them. Emily's head snapped up. I didn't. Karen's look silenced her. The man shook his head firmly. I was watching. She didn't refuse anything. Karen's voice sharpened, still sugar-coated. Sir, you must have been mistaken. Please enjoy your own meal. I'll handle this. Emily sat frozen, her cheeks burning, her appetite gone. She stabbed at the pasta once, then pushed the tray away. Hunger gnawed, but humiliation was heavier. When Karen returned later to collect trays, she leaned just close enough for Emily to hear. Her words, venomous whispers. First class isn't for little girls like you. Don't get too comfortable. Emily's chest squeezed again, not from asthma this time, but from the cruelty that wrapped around her like barbed wire. The man across the aisle shifted, his jaw tight, fists clenched on the armrest. He wanted to help, Emily could feel it, but Karen's authority loomed like an invisible wall. Around them, silence. Passengers shifted uneasily, eyes darting toward Emily, then away again, as though her pain was contagious. And Emily, small and hungry, hugged her arms to herself and stared at the untouched pasta, the missing bread and dessert carved into her memory like proof. She did not belong. The cabin lights dimmed, and first class settled into quiet comfort. For everyone else, it was peaceful. For Emily, the half-empty tray on her table was a reminder. She'd been singled out. Her pasta sat untouched. Everyone else had bread and dessert. She had nothing. The missing items screamed louder than her hunger. Karen appeared again, her smile polished for the cabin. When her eyes met Emily's, it turned sharp. Didn't finish? Karen said, voice loud enough for others nearby. Some kids don't appreciate what they're given. Emily shifted, her cheeks hot. Karen cut her off, tilting her head. Plenty of energy to cough and wheeze earlier. Now, no appetite? First class is meant to be restful, not a stage performance. A few chuckles rippled from behind. Emily's throat tightened. The man across the aisle leaned forward. That's inappropriate. She's a child. Karen's smile never faltered. Sir, I assure you I'm handling it. But thank you for your concern. She turned back to Emily, her voice dropping just enough to sting. This cabin isn't for everyone. Remember that. Emily froze, the words hitting harder than the skipped meal. The man bristled. That's enough. Karen's tone sharpened, still polite. Sir, sit back. Escalating won't help. And then louder for the cabin to hear. Ladies and gentlemen, first class has certain standards. Some passengers simply aren't familiar with them. The implication was clear. Eyes shifted. A couple of passengers glanced at Emily, pity and discomfort written on their faces. Most looked away. Emily's chest heaved. She pressed her hands against her face, but the tears broke through anyway. Sobs shook her small frame. The man leaned toward her. You're okay, sweetheart. You've done nothing wrong. But she couldn't stop. Hunger, shame, exhaustion, it all spilled out in tears. Karen gave one last satisfied glance before walking on, her heels clicking, as if she'd accomplished something. The cabin returned to silence. Screens flickered, forks clinked, and in the middle of it all, Emily cried quietly, the weight of Karen's words echoing inside her. You don't belong here. Emily sat curled against the window, her sleeves damp with tears. Her chest still quivered from crying, and every hiccuped breath felt like proof of weakness. Around her, the cabin hummed softly, but inside her world was nothing but silence and shame. Across the aisle, the man watched her. His jaw was tight, his fork idle. He had seen enough of the missing food, the cutting remarks, the deliberate cruelty. He couldn't sit by any longer. He leaned into the aisle. Excuse me, miss, he said firmly, his voice steady but rising above the hush. This treatment of a child is unacceptable. Karen paused mid-step, turning as though she'd been summoned. Her smile returned, practiced and bright. Sir, if you have a service request, I'll gladly assist. Otherwise, please let me attend to my duties. This is my request, he said. Stop targeting her. He gestured to Emily, still curled small in her seat. She's done nothing to deserve this. Karen's smile thinned. With respect, you don't understand the full situation. She's been disruptive. I've exercised patience. The man's voice sharpened. I watched everything. She wasn't disruptive, she was sick, and you denied her food, mocked her, humiliated her in front of strangers. That's not patience. That's abuse. Passengers stirred, whispers rising. A woman 2 rows back leaned forward, curiosity in her eyes. Another man shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Emily, then back at Karen. Karen's posture stiffened. "Sir, I will not be lectured on how to do my job." "Then do it right," he shot back. For a moment the air thickened. Emily lifted her head slightly, her tear-streaked face catching the light. Her eyes darted between them, Karen with her polished smile, the man with his steady anger. Karen leaned closer, her voice clipped. First-class passengers expect order and calm. She created chaos from the moment she boarded. The man's hand pressed against his armrest, knuckles white. "She's a child traveling alone. What she deserves is compassion, not cruelty." The exchange had drawn more attention now. Screens paused, eyes turned. The weight of silent witnesses pressed in. Karen straightened, brushing at her uniform. "If you have a formal complaint, you may file it after landing. For now, I'll thank you to remain seated." But her confidence wavered. The man's words had cracked the polished mask. He didn't back down. His voice carried now, deliberately loud enough for others to hear. "Passengers, you saw it too. A child denied food, mocked, reduced to tears. Are we going to pretend it didn't happen?" A murmur rippled. Someone coughed uncomfortably. Another voice whispered, "I saw." Emily's heart thudded. For the first time all flight, she felt the balance shift. The man's defense wrapped around her like a shield she'd never expected. She still trembled, still felt small, but something inside flickered a fragile spark that whispered, "Maybe I'm not invisible." Karen's eyes swept the cabin, reading the unease. Her smile stayed, but it strained now, taut at the edges. She pivoted away, muttering, "Enjoy your meals." The man leaned back slowly, but his eyes stayed fixed on her, unyielding. Emily wiped at her cheeks with the back of her hand, her breath uneven. She looked at him, and he offered the smallest nod, steady and reassuring. For the first time since boarding, Emily felt she wasn't completely alone. Emily tried to bury herself deeper in her seat, arms wrapped around her knees. The hum of the plane should have been comforting, but now it was a reminder of every eye trained on her small frame. Karen's heels clicked sharply in the aisle, slicing through the low murmur of first-class conversation. "Oh, I see someone didn't finish her snack," Karen said, her voice loud enough for the nearest passengers to hear. She tilted her head, eyes scanning Emily with a predatory amusement. "I suppose some children need a little more guidance in eating like proper passengers." Her lips curved into that practiced, poisonous smile, the one that cut sharper than any words alone. Emily's chest constricted. A few passengers shifted, discomfort flashing in their eyes, some raising phones discreetly. Karen's gaze flicked toward the subtle movements, then sharpened. "Recording is unnecessary," she said, her voice low and icy, though the warning only encouraged a few more phones to lift. As Emily shrank into herself, hoping to disappear entirely, a fellow passenger whispered across the aisle, "This is too much. Someone has to step in." Emily barely caught the words over the tight rhythm of her own heartbeat. But then, horror compounded her fear. One of the white crew members assigned to first-class service stepped beside Karen. He leaned close, whispering something sarcastic, and pointed in her ear. The two exchanged a conspiratorial smirk, like predators celebrating a hunt. Emily felt a hot flush rise in her cheeks, not from warmth, but humiliation. The cabin felt smaller, every whisper and glance amplifying her shame. Karen bent slightly, eyes locking onto Emily's tear-streaked face. "Traveling alone is no excuse for bad behavior," she hissed, each word deliberate, each syllable designed to wound. "Perhaps next time a child of your age should consider staying home until they can handle flying with dignity." A soft murmur ran through the cabin. Some passengers whispered to each other, clearly disturbed. Others, emboldened by the display, raised their phones. Emily's hands shook so violently she almost dropped the small stuffed animal she clutched. Across the aisle, the man who had defended her before leaned forward, jaw tight, fists clenching around his napkin. He caught Emily's eyes and gave her a barely perceptible nod. A silent signal. Hold on. But even his presence couldn't erase the sting of betrayal from a crew member, someone whose duty was to protect passengers, now aiding Karen's cruelty. Emily's breath came in quick, shallow bursts. The heat in her chest, the sharp pangs of embarrassment, and the tremor of suppressed tears threatened to overwhelm her. Karen straightened, brushing invisible lint from her uniform. "Now, everyone," she said, loud enough to draw the attention of a few more passengers. "Let's all remember proper etiquette. Children traveling alone must learn the rules quickly or face consequences." Her eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of inflicted humiliation. Emily bowed her head, biting her lip to stop the sob that threatened to escape. The cabin seemed to close around her, the walls pressing in, the carpeted floor suddenly too hard beneath her small shoes. She felt utterly alone, yet a tiny spark, fragile and trembling, flickered somewhere inside her chest. Across the aisle, a few passengers exchanged uneasy glances. Some whispered urgently, debating whether to intervene, but the presence of the crew member at Karen's side gave pause. Nobody wanted to draw attention to themselves, but the injustice was undeniable. Phones hovered, capturing the moment for the world beyond the cabin, as Emily sat small and trembling, yet still present, still visible. And in that terrible, suffocating silence, Emily realized she had endured worse before, and this cruelty would not define her. Not entirely. Not if she could survive the next hour. The plane shuddered slightly as it began its final descent. Emily's hands were still trembling, her small body hunched in her seat. But the spark inside her refused to die. Around her, the cabin murmured with the low drone of passengers settling in for landing. Phones buzzed softly, screens glowing in the dim light, capturing the cruelty they had just witnessed. Karen moved down the aisle, her uniform perfectly pressed, her smile unwavering for anyone not paying close attention. The complicit crew member trailed beside her, a silent accomplice, and together they exuded a polished, untouchable confidence. Yet with every step, the whispers of passengers grew louder, barely contained murmurs of disapproval and shock. Emily kept her gaze fixed on the small window beside her. She could feel the blanket in her lap, the last fragment of warmth and comfort she possessed. The plane's descent rattled her nerves, and then, quietly, the first notifications started pinging on the screens around her. Someone had uploaded the video. The whispers had become urgent conversation. "Look, it's all on social media. Everyone will see this. She didn't deserve this." Emily's pulse quickened. She had survived the humiliation in real time, but now it was multiplying, spreading beyond the confines of the cabin. Her heart thumped in both fear and anticipation. At the airport, her father, Marcus, was already waiting. He had been following the flight's progress closely, aware that his daughter was traveling alone due to her mother's ongoing treatment. His phone buzzed continuously with incoming notifications, videos of Karen mocking Emily, her cruel laughter, the complicit crew members smirking as the child shrank in her seat. Marcus's hands tightened around his phone, his jaw set, every fiber of his being burned with fury, a protective instinct honed over years of authority and responsibility. He was not just any parent as the FAA's regional director. He had the authority to intervene immediately in airline emergencies. And this, he decided, was one. As the plane taxied to the gate, Marcus didn't wait for the doors to open. He made his way toward the jet bridge, his presence commanding. Inside, the murmurs among passengers grew into uneasy shuffles as the first few screens illuminated with the viral clips. Some passengers exchanged anxious glances, realizing the unfolding consequences were not contained to the social media sphere. Karen's polished smile faltered slightly as she noticed the figure approaching. The familiar stride, the unmistakable air of authority. She froze for the briefest moment, and the passengers noticed. The complicit crew member shifted uneasily. Marcus stepped aboard the plane before passengers could even disembark. His eyes scanned the cabin until they landed on Emily, small and curled in her seat, cheeks damp with tears. Without a word, he moved to her side, kneeling just enough to be at her eye level. "Emily," he said softly but firmly, brushing the hair from her forehead. "I've seen everything." Her eyes widened, confusion and relief mixing in a single glance. "Daddy," she whispered, voice trembling. Marcus stood abruptly, his voice rising with authority, carrying across the cabin. "This flight is grounded immediately. No one disembarks until an investigation is complete. And you," he said, locking eyes with Karen, "will be suspended pending review. Your accomplice as well." Gasps rippled through the cabin. Phones captured the scene in real time as passengers silently cheered, relief washing over the small group who had been powerless moments before. Karen's composure cracked, the polished mask shattered, while her companion could only glance nervously around the cabin, knowing there was no defense. Emily let out a shaky breath, clutching her father's hand. She could feel the tension lift slightly, the weight of humiliation easing, if only just. Around them, the cabin was alive with whispered relief, the tension of injustice finally being confronted. Marcus's voice softened as he crouched beside Emily again. "You did nothing wrong. This behavior is unacceptable, and justice will be served. Always remember, never let anyone make you feel less than you are." Emily's chest rose and fell in deeper, steadier breaths. The spark inside her, small, fragile, but unbroken, had grown. It flickered into something stronger: courage, dignity, and the knowledge that even in the darkest moments, she was never truly alone. Outside, the media had already begun to circulate clips of the incident, but inside the cabin, Emily felt safe for the first time that day. Her father's presence, the authority he wielded, and the silent support of passengers who had witnessed her ordeal all combined to form a shield stronger than any blanket, stronger than any cruel remark. And as the plane remained grounded, the first steps toward accountability had begun. Emily no longer felt invisible. Not today. Not ever again. The plane sat motionless at the gate, engines quiet, a rare stillness in the normally bustling terminal. Emily clutched her small blanket, now a symbol not of humiliation, but of survival. Her eyes, still glistening from tears, followed her father, Marcus, as he walked beside her, guiding her away from the cabin where the ordeal had taken place. Emily had been traveling alone because her mother, suffering through chemotherapy, couldn't accompany her. Each step of this journey was a reminder of that absence, a weight Emily carried silently. Her father had arranged everything carefully: Emily's flight, the escort protocols, even the notification to the airline. But nothing could prepare her for the cruelty she had faced midair. Yet now, with the ordeal behind her, she felt something she hadn't anticipated: a quiet, unshakable strength. As they moved through the terminal, Emily noticed the faces of passengers who had witnessed the events aboard the plane. Some smiled softly, others gave discreet nods of encouragement. A few young travelers waved shyly, holding their phones with recordings that would later ripple across social media. Emily's heart lifted slightly. She realized she was not alone, that the small acts of solidarity in the cabin had mattered more than she could have imagined. Marcus's grip on her hand was firm, reassuring. He had used his official authority as the FAA's regional director to ensure the airline could not evade accountability for the incident. Karen, the flight attendant, had been suspended immediately, along with a complicit crew member, pending a formal investigation. The airline had no choice but to cooperate. Videos of the harassment had gone viral even before the plane had fully emptied. Emily had unwittingly become the center of a reckoning that would reverberate far beyond the flight. "Daddy," Emily's voice was small, tentative. "I've got you," Marcus said, squeezing her hand gently. "You were brave. That courage, holding on even when it felt impossible, will carry you through far more than this single flight ever could." Emily nodded, swallowing a lump in her throat. The courage Marcus spoke of was fragile, but it was real. Each step through the terminal, past the waiting crowds and the whispering travelers, strengthened it. She had been forced to endure cruelty, but she had not let it define her. They reached the exit to the waiting cars. Marcus paused, turning to look at Emily fully. "Remember why we do this," he said softly. "This trip was important. Your mother is counting on you. In this moment, everything that happened, it doesn't diminish that. You kept moving forward. That's the real journey." Emily's eyes widened as she realized he was right. She had been traveling to visit her father because her mother's health required intensive treatment. She had been alone in a strange environment, but she had survived. She had confronted the sting of cruelty and emerged not broken, but wiser, stronger, more certain of her own worth. Outside, the city skyline stretched in the late afternoon sun, golden and forgiving. The air smelled of possibility, of life continuing even after harshness. Marcus guided Emily into the car, and as the vehicle pulled away, she glanced back at the terminal. Somewhere inside, Karen's humiliation was now public knowledge. The airline's authority challenged, justice quietly beginning its work. Emily leaned back in her seat, clutching the blanket once more, but now it felt like a shield rather than a weight. "I'm glad you were there," she said softly to her father. "I'll always be," Marcus replied, a firm promise. "And you'll always have your courage. That's yours alone, Emily. Nobody can take that away." As the city passed by in a blur of lights and streets, Emily allowed herself a small smile. She had survived the flight, faced cruelty, and witnessed its accountability. She had traveled alone out of necessity, endured humiliation, and discovered within herself a quiet fire that no amount of scorn could extinguish. The journey had begun with fear and ended with recognition of her own strength, the loyalty of her father, and the power of justice. Emily no longer felt invisible. She was seen, she was heard, and for the first time in a long while, she felt whole. The plane, the humiliation, the viral videos, they were behind her. Ahead lay a life where courage mattered more than cruelty, and where love and protection could always reach across any distance. Emily squeezed her mother's hand, her chest lighter, her heart stronger. She had come through the storm, and she knew now she could face whatever lay ahead.